So I enjoyed your talk. Thank you very much. And the topic of language variation is of particular interest to me. And you, in your talk as well as your paper, you problematize the issue of how we define language. And you offered some understanding and parameters for us to understand language variation. Can you expand on that for the viewers here?
Sure, absolutely. I think the way that I started the presentation is something I often do very often, actually, not just with presentations, but also when I teach. And I start off by asking people, how is it that you define language? And very often, and that's where I was playing off the notion of being a magician, I've done it so many times that I can predict almost that 90% plus of the audience will say language is a means of communication. Mm-hmm. Now, and I use that to problematize the notion of how language teachers don't actually understand what the subject matter is that they teach. If they see language is only communication, they're only seeing a part of the picture. Because language is used for communication, but language is not communication. And I think, and that's where I start asking people, so think of it this way, if you were a physics teacher, you would know what physics is. You would know physics is a study of matter. You know, if you were a history teacher, you would know what history is. History is a study of past events. But when you ask an English teacher what language is, which is what their content is, they don't know.
And that was very striking. I mean, it rung home with me and with others in the audience. I could see the people next to me that we kind of had a light bulb go on.
Yeah.
That actually, we don't know what we teach at some level, yes.
Yes, exactly. Because a lot of times when you're trained in language teaching, you're trained in a methodology.
Yes.
Not in the subject.
Yes.
Or if there is subject knowledge, it comes in through a course in grammar. Mm-hmm. So that's where my second question was, what is grammar? And again, I love to play magician in this sort of context, and I said, it's like, I can predict what your answer is going to be. It's going to be something along the lines of, grammar is the structure of language, it's the rules of in which we use language, it's the sounds and the words and this syntax put together. But again, those understandings essentially are coming from a notion of our taking courses on grammar, our having learned that, this is, transformational grammar, or this is traditional grammar, this is prescriptive pedagogical grammar. Those are the kind of things we have, but we don't actually look at what grammar is in itself. And grammar, again, for the audience here, grammar is a theory of language. It's a theory of language. It's like any other theory. A theory is developed to explain a certain phenomenon. The phenomenon in case for grammar is language. The data that you collect, the language samples that you have, your explanation of how these language samples work is what grammar is. And therefore you can actually have many different kinds of grammars based, one, on what kind of data you have, two, the kind of questions that you're asking. So when you're explaining a theory, when you're explaining a phenomenon, you have a certain set of questions that you're exploring. And so you've got a theoretical lens. So that lens sort of leads you into developing a grammar of a particular kind.
And I could see the audience, those on either side of me, that your definition of grammar as a theory really gave a lens through which to understand what they're teaching for their students. It might be a prescriptive grammar for standardized tests, but you gave them a lens through which to understand what they're doing.
Yes, absolutely.
And see some other lenses that maybe aren't in their classrooms, but they exist.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's very important. So, in a sense, over a number of years, and for some very good reasons, language teacher programs have become, devoid of any linguistics. Mm-hmm. There are reasons for it. So, for example, when I did my master's work in TESOL and applied linguistics, I was taught transformational grammar, mm-hmm. right? I was taught generative grammar. I practiced, transformational trees from deep to surface and all that stuff. Yep. And even then, as a student, I used to wonder, what am I ever going to do with this? How will I, as a classroom teacher, use this? Mm-hmm. And so over a sense of time, we keep these units because they are a part of our baggage, but they have no application in what we do. So what do people do who do applied linguistics in TESOL? They forget about it. Yeah. And they think that linguistics is useless. And linguistics does things that are not relevant. And so I think bringing in a topic like language variation talks to people talks to teachers in sense of what can linguistics do to help us understand what the nature of language is, and how do we use those understandings to use them in our classrooms as teachers. And I think that's where what I was trying to do in the talk. I wish I had more time, of course, as always, but trying to discuss what language is, what grammar is, what language variation is, what are some of the parameters of language variation, and then, on the other hand, talk about pedagogy, and looking at student text, looking at teaching learning cycle, and so how do you combine a pedagogical theory and a linguistic theory together, and that's where the power comes. So a lot of the different traditions in TESOL either are devoid of a theory of language, so they don't actually engage with language, and that's why teachers don't know what language is. They don't know what grammar is. And they also often do not actually engage with pedagogy at a theoretical level. They think of it in terms of methodologies or practices rather than thinking of it theoretically. And I think it is the theory and the practice that comes together that really empowers people.
To make informed decisions in the classrooms.
Absolutely.
If you understand the theory by which the method or the practice was designed, they're empowered as educators in the classroom.
That's correct, yes, absolutely.
So on your University of Sydney webpage, you have a short clip, and you talk about changing students, that when they leave you, as maybe they're your apprentice, they become changed.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. It's. I think to a certain degree that's what my purpose was today, and I think the audience that was really engaged with the presentation would have left changed, because
I left changed.
Yes, because all of a sudden you sort of start realizing things that you just took as assumed, and you never questioned, and that opening up these questions for discussion. Talking about these things impacts people and impacts their practices. So if you're taking a course in my program, then the kind of understanding of language that we help build during the program revolutionizes the way essentially that you think about language and the role of language in individual, social, and human development. So I have a whole different workshop and a talk, which of course we wouldn't have time to talk about today, but it's called Linguistics for Development, and looking at how linguistics and a study of language is very crucial to when we look at socio-economic developments, and we're looking at the developing world, and not just the developing world, the developed world as well. And how do you actually, and again, linguists over a number of years have become so abstractly theoretical, and again not engaging with issues and questions in society, that the people don't realize that linguists have something to offer, and so they are often ignored. But in fact, linguistics, if you do the right kind of linguistics, and if you've got the right questions to ask about language and language use and language in context, then it has huge applications and implications for social and economic development. So, for example, people are doing incredible work in forensic linguistics, which can have implications in so many aspects of our lives and societies. People are looking at medical discourses and language, and those will have a huge impact on how healthcare can work and operate. So these are all dimensions of and applications of language and linguistics in the society, and these things are what change people. So once you start engaging with these questions, once you starting saying, well, research is not about doing an abstract theoretical project, but it ties in with a particular it's
domain
research.
Of society.
Yes, it's a domain of society. It's trying to address a real world problem. I mean, this is what we call appliable linguistics, right?
Yeah, I mean, it brings to me when you're saying, language in the law is a well thought of, application of linguistics in society, but the areas that you've mentioned, they haven't really been pursued as much. So there is a lot that language and linguistics can inform domains.
And I think that those questions and those discussions as part of being a MA student really impacts students' outlook towards life and about what their subject matter can actually contribute how they can contribute to the society they're in. So I encourage the students to actually take up, even if they're small sort of things, but to take up real world sort of problems and issues and study them using linguistics as a tool of analysis. I'll give you just one example of how a couple of my students were looking at medical pamphlets that are distributed to people who are in a natural disaster zone. So you have a huge flood, and there are medical problems that arise out of these floods,
Yes.
and there are diseases and communicable diseases that come out. How do people or agencies provide material and information to the affectees of these floods to educate them on how to reduce the risk of communicable diseases? And then if you study those and you use your knowledge of multimodal texts and your understanding of language, then you can actually design much better material. So my students can then work with aid agencies to help them design material that is going to be easier to use and read. I'll give you a concrete example, it's sort of related to it. When you buy a medicine, buy medicine in most parts of the world. So let me give you an example from Pakistan. You buy a cough medicine, or you might buy an antibiotic or any medicine, you would always have a little pamphlet that comes as an information sheet. This information sheet in Pakistan is bilingual, it's in English and Urdu. Okay. But the print size is so small that I would need a magnifying glass to be able to read it. And now, because I'm interested in it, I'd actually take a magnifying glass and I went and read it, tried to read it. I couldn't understand it. Because it wasn't written in a language that's accessible to me.
People,
right? As a common person. So essentially, what these medical companies are doing, they're putting a check on a government regulation
that they provided information.
That they provide information, but that information has no impact at all. Now, if my students can study these and analyze these, and then they can probably work with the pharmaceutical companies to create multimodal texts that are not dense in language, have perhaps a few images and few basic words and texts in language that people can understand. That slight shift in how those pamphlets are designed and written up can have a huge impact on human society, right? So that's where I think linguistics has so much to offer, and it's not offering it. And linguists have a lot to do, and they're not doing it. And so I think that's where the power comes, and that's where engaging with these questions really change the way students engage with language and see their role as linguists in a society. And it's not simply language teaching, but much more.
Yeah, much more. Yeah, very nice. Well, thank you, Ahmar, for taking time, and I enjoyed talking with you as well as your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.